Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument, hosted by the militant, Marxist, anti-Santa, Martin Bradbury. The Bradbury Group is streamed live on Rover, Sky TV, YouTube and Facebook. Proudly sponsored by Volatile, journalism you can trust. Let the arguments begin.
Aotearoa, the true demarcation of power in a late-stage capitalism, liberal, progressive democracy is the 1% richest plus their 9% enablers versus the 90% rest of us. Welcome to the Bradbury Group, Election 26, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. I'm your host, the editor of the daily blog, Martin Bradbury. Bomber to my comrades, Mr. Bradbury if you're nasty. My pronouns are us and we. Coming up on this evening's show, the political panel all-stars tonight are New Zealand Herald columnist, academic and political commentator Matthew Hooton, President of the Māori Party John Tamahere, and Māori broadcaster and political raconteur Matthew Tukaki. Tonight's 1-on-1 and 10 is the leader of the Labour Party, Chris Hipkins, to discuss the opening issues of the election year. Shout out to Kiwi Skirt and Chewy from BHN moderating tonight's YouTube page. Good evening to all the Bradbury Easters online watching right now. Your comments will appear on screen as we go. Shout out to our Wātea Facebook, Rover, Spotify, Apple Podcast and Sky TV whānau. Remember to like and subscribe because that's all that is holding the Fourth Estate together right now. And our Twitter panel tonight is Tim Selwyn. He'll be tweeting live online at Twitter, hashtag the Bradbury Group. Before all that, however, is this week's War on News. Brothers and sisters, let's try to catch up on 2026 so far. So, Stranger Things Season 5 finally dropped, and everyone who loved good story structure cried. Then Donald Trump illegally kidnapped the president of Venezuela and seized all the oil, and everyone who cared about the rule of law cried. Then Winston Peters called for New Zealand to pull out of the WHO because the conspiracy swamp that Matua Winston fishes out of now believes the WHO is a shadowy one world government run by a satanic child abusing cabal, and everyone with a basic reading age of over 5 cried. Then Donald Trump decided he wanted to steal Greenland and invade Iran, and everyone with any basic knowledge of the world cried. Then extreme weather exacerbated by climate change hit New Zealand, causing grievous damage and a terrible loss of life at Mount Maunganui, all while our Prime Minister pranced around handing out boxes of food despite closing a $6 billion climate relief fund, despite butchering environmental protections with fast-track mining powers, despite lowering the methane levels to meaningless, and everyone paying attention to the Prime Minister using a climate change disaster as a PR stunt was filled with rage and cried. Then Donald's secret police private militia started executing innocent citizens on the streets of America, and everyone who has studied 1930s history wept because we know where that story goes. Then 3 million new Epstein files were posted online and there was a gasping, sobbing horror. And then the new update of Terraria dropped, which alleviated some of the crying. And the documentary Melania was released so that at least February starts with a laugh. Comrades, it's been a rough January. Buckle up because I don't think it's going to get better anytime soon. Now might be a good time to try medicinal cannabis. The political panel all-stars up shortly, whānau, but first this week's 1-on-1 and 10 with leader of the Labour Party live from Waitangi, Chris Hipkins. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful.
Well, kia ora, Bomber. Great to talk to you and greetings from Waitangi.
Chris, we want to dive straight into things. Last year, the Prime Minister promised us growth, growth, growth. And the only things that grew were unemployment, inflation, people leaving New Zealand, and the amount of meth we consume each year. I think voters will be feeling very cheated by the economy, with many experiencing a grim Christmas and a harsh cost of living summer. The decision by this government in early 2024 to smash Labour's infrastructure pipeline has seen 140,000 leave New Zealand in 2 years, which has caused cascade failures throughout the economy. Should Kiwis feel angry at this government's ideological economic experiment?
I think Kiwis are entitled to feel both angry and disappointed. National said they were going to fix the economy, and they made it worse. They said that 2025 was going to be the year of growth, and they managed to shrink the economy in the year of growth. They said that they were going to get people off the job seeker benefit and into work, and they've smashed jobs, and there's more people on the job seeker benefit now than when they started. They said that they were going to balance the government's books, and they've made the government's deficit bigger. They said that they were going to stop government borrowing, and they're borrowing more money than we ever did. I think Kiwis have got every right to feel like this government's completely out of touch and has broken all the promises they made them.
Bernard Hickey makes the point that the previous state cutbacks to deal with the 1990, 1997, 2007 and 2020 recessions only worked because the level of private debt and business debt was so low. However, it is far higher now, meaning households and businesses can't step in to pick up the cost of the cutbacks. There is a fundamental problem with the strategic thinking of this government when it comes to the economy, is there not? User pays doesn't work if the users can't pay.
Well, it's not just, I think, this government. It's those who believe in the sort of the new right neoliberalism, where you just shrink the size of the state and transfer all the debt onto households instead of the collective debt that we previously held as a government, that things will get better. I think we've reached the limits of that now. You can't actually transfer more debt onto households because if you look at the amount of money that households are borrowing, we're getting up to unsustainable debt levels, property prices, unsustainable property prices. This is not the way that we're going to grow our economy. We're not going to grow our economy by, pumping up house prices even higher, mortgaging ourselves up even higher. That isn't a recipe for sustainable economic progress.
How good is Barbara Edmonds going to be up against Nicola Willis this year in the House?
I think Barbara Edmonds is going to be fantastic, and because she knows her stuff, she's an expert in this, but also because she actually understands what it's like to raise 8 kids,
right?
And really kind of just has her feet firmly on the ground, embedded in local communities, and she gets what people are saying when they come to her and they say, look, we've got these cost of living issues that the government seem to be out of touch with. I think Barb gets that.
Yeah. I want to talk to you, Chris, tonight about the rising anti-immigrant sentiment we're seeing alongside the rise of New Zealand First. Over the weekend, we saw Bishop Brian Tamaki attempting to exploit anti-immigrant sentiment. We've seen Shane Jones jump on the bucket people issue at rock pools, and we saw New Zealand First attack the free trade deal with India. I want to put something to you. I know a 40-year-old Pākehā woman. She's a cleaner. She's been told by her boss that there is less work because migrant workers from India and Asia are undercutting their prices and they are losing contracts. I asked this woman who she was voting for, and she said New Zealand First because Winston will protect me from migrant workers taking my job. Her fears and economic anxiety are shared by many domestic working class workers when it comes to immigration. What would you say as the leader of the Labour Party to those who share her fears?
I think we've got to be really careful in the debate around immigration, that it doesn't just become xenophobic,
yes,
that we're dealing with legitimate concerns that people are raising about the level of population growth. How much population growth can we absorb as a country before our infrastructure gets strained?
yes.
How many houses do we have? And we are really straining to cope with the population growth we've got at the moment. But I'd hate that to end up being an anti-migrant sentiment.
Right.
You go around rest homes around the country and you'll find migrant workers caring for some of our most vulnerable people.
Exactly.
Doing absolutely amazing work.
Yes.
And I just hate it when it all just gets generalised into an anti-migrant. The migrants are to blame for everything. There's a great cartoon that I absolutely love, and it's a really rich guy with this huge pile of cookies in front of him. And then there's another guy with one cookie, and he's pointing, and the rich guy's pointing at him saying, careful, that migrant wants to steal your cookie.
Right.
That's very much the territory we're in at the moment. Those in power, those with privilege are saying it's all the migrants' fault.
Yes.
Never willing to look at themselves and the contribution that they're making to people's lives being more difficult.
Exactly. I have prepared tribunal cases where there have been egregious exploitation of migrant workers. It might say 20 hours in the contract to get the visa, but in many cases, migrant workers are worked many more hours with no pay. There is only one labour inspectorate for every 3,000 migrant workers. Surely the solution here to ensure migrant workers aren't exploited and to support domestic workers so their wages don't fall is for every migrant worker joining a migrant worker union. Universal union membership for migrant workers would stamp out exploitation while ensuring domestic workers know the same conditions and wages are being protected. Why isn't universal migrant union membership being considered?
Well, I think, unions have a role to play here. Things like fair pay agreements can play a role because it actually stops the race to the bottom. It stops employers undercutting each other by cutting the wages of their employees. Fair pay agreements would really prevent that from happening. Modern slavery, tackling modern slavery.
Right.
Despite the fact that during the leaders' debate in the last election, Christopher Luxon said he'd march in the streets over modern slavery, only now because two backbench MPs have got together from Labor and National, are we actually finally going to have a debate in the House about it?
Yes.
Christopher Luxon's government have done nothing on modern slavery, even though he said that this was the greatest issue that was near and dear to his heart.
Last issue of this interview is the appalling impact of climate change versus the government's war on the environment. It seemed to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, but it seemed to me when you were Prime Minister during Cyclone Gabriel that the enormity of the damage you saw had a really visceral effect on you, did it?
Absolutely. I came back and we sat around and I said to Grant Robertson, we're going to have to do something meaningful about this. We can't just keep responding to these events and pretending that these are one-off events. They're not one-off events anymore. Yeah. We need to be better prepared. We need to change the way we respond. We can't just lurch from emergency to emergency. We've actually got to get on top of this. I was heartbroken by what I saw after Cyclone Gabriel, but I was also heartbroken by what I saw after the anniversary weekend floods in Auckland. These aren't 1 in a 100-year events anymore. They're happening all of the time. So we set up the $6 billion fund, which was about building more resilience, and then National came into government and cut it, said that it was wasteful spending. Preparing communities for the fact that more extreme weather events are coming is not wasteful spending.
The right are always underplaying the reality of climate change. They promote climate denial. Some of the right-wing hate trolls were even trying to blame co-governance on the Mount Maunganui landslide, for crying out loud. Climate change is here. It is real. This government cut, as you said, your $6 billion climate defence fund. They are allowing fast-track mining, and they cut $25 million from civil defence last year. They even held up your natural disaster management plan because they don't like the co-governance language you used to empower marae as the front line, despite gushing over how wonderful the marae were once again in these latest storms. As far as National are concerned, the answer to every climate problem is more cows and less co-governance. What must we do about climate change now?
We've got to tackle our emissions. We've got to tackle the transition. We've got to realise that fossil fuels, despite Shane Jones basically blocking New Zealand signing up to a pathway away from fossil fuels, we've got to transition away from fossil fuels. We've got to be prepared for the fact that more extreme weather events are going to happen, and we've got to have better systems in place. And that means, Christopher Luxon was saying, isn't it great that marae were prepared for this? They were prepared because the last Labor government gave them a whole lot of resources to be better prepared.
Right.
And we did that after Cyclone Gabriel because I saw firsthand what an amazing role they had played, and they did it off the smell of an oily rag. And I said, we've got to get behind them and actually support them to do this. And now the government, despite the fact that they said that it was all wasteful spending at the time, they're now saying, isn't it great that marae were prepared? That didn't happen by accident. It happened because we worked with them to make sure they were prepared.
Is New Zealand First's climate denial the biggest hurdle you have in maybe having any arrangement with them post-election?
Climate denial, their attacks on the rainbow community, their attacks on migrants.
Pretty much everything, right? It's a platter. It's a buffet, isn't it?
There's a bit of a list,
Finally, Chris, your message to the whānau as we enter election 2026, please.
This election matters. All elections matter, but this one feels like it really matters. And my message to everyone is look at the number of young New Zealanders giving up and leaving the country.
Yeah.
Record numbers of young Kiwis giving up and leaving the country. We cannot go on like this. We've got to give those young people a future, a reason to stay here in New Zealand and make their lives here in New Zealand. National has no answers for that, so it's time to get rid of them.
Thank you, comrade. We will see you again soon on the show. Have a great weekend.
Good to talk.
Cheers, comrade. Okay, now to our political panel all-stars. Our first panellist is the moral shepherd of the right, the architect of the Death Star, political commentator and academic who is perpetually joining us from a secure, undisclosed location for reasons we can't disclose. New Zealand Herald columnist Matthew Hooton. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Good morning. How are you?
We're great. We're great. You're coming to us on the side. One word to describe the week, please.
One word to describe the week. Very exciting.
Very exciting. Fair enough. Our next panellist is a lover and a fighter, but mostly
Root is going to make the next decade of New Zealand sport as exciting as it was for athletics.
Well,
so whatever we are politically, that's some good news there. John Walker's world record, New Zealand record finally broken. So that was my highlight of the week. There's nothing in politics that comes to match that.
Our next panellist is a lover and a fighter, but mostly a fighter. He famously sued Mike Hosking for defamation, which pretty much gives him a get-out-of-jail card free for the rest of his life. President of the Māori Party, John Tamahiri. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show.
Kia ora.
One word to describe the week, please, sir.
Crooked courier polls.
Yes.
That's all. Thank you.
That's all. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, political commentator, broadcaster, and raconteur. He's the Māori for all seasons, talkback host of the mighty Wātia Network, the working class anvil that is Matthew Tukaki. Kia ora, comrade. One word to describe the week, please, sir.
It's a Latin word. It's a mentia, which means extreme folly, because that's what's going on this week with climate change policy. That's nonsense perpetuated by mythological filth rats like Cameron Slater talking about what's going on the side of Mount Maunganui, right through to the stupidity of these right-wing bloggers and commentators masquerading as political commentators, journalists, and people with any street credibility at all. I call them filth rats, which is probably another Latin term for a mentia, but no one's going to test me on that. Filth rat, filth rat, filth rat.
Brothers and sisters, let's get into tonight's show. Issue 1, what happened to the economic green shoots of recovery? Issue 2, anti-immigrant sentiment and the rise of New Zealand First. And issue 3 tonight, Trump's new world disorder. Plus, we'll have a final word at the end of the show where each panellist gets to go to the mountaintop to see who breaches broadcasting standards this week. All of our money is on John. Comrades, let's get into issue 1 and the economic meltdown. Matthew Hooton. The Prime Minister is promising economic recovery, but the headlines are telling a different story. IRD crackdown lifts liquidations to 16-year high. Can the Prime Minister and Finance Minister tell New Zealand it's getting better when it's still feeling like it's getting worse?
Well, they need to be careful about how well they say things are getting better, because they must not sound out of touch. And some of their rhetoric is just too over the top. They're almost sounding the way you would sound if the economy was booming. And it isn't booming, but it is recovering. And there is a reversion to the mean, regardless of what the government would do. If things were as bad as they have been for the last couple of years, of course, there's going to be some improvement. And that's what we're seeing. I heard Chris Hipkins saying that, we've got this problem that the government's cut back the size of the government and that the size of the state, and that neoliberal revolution is failing. Well, the government hasn't cut back the size of the state. That's the whole point. In fact, earlier in Chris Hipkins' interview, he was saying, they're borrowing more and spending more and taxing more than we were. That is the truth. The reason the economy has been so pathetic over the term of this government is because they've been fiscally reckless, first with their tax package. I mean, Mrs. Thatcher, Ruth Richardson, Roger Douglas would never cut tax at the time there's a big fiscal deficit. So they were fiscally reckless at the beginning, and then they haven't really cut the size of the state. They've expanded it, and they've crowded out private sector investment. So ironically, Chris Hipkins was right in the first half of his interview and wrong in the second half of it when he contradicted himself.
Follow-up question, how will zombie small businesses keep alive, who have been kept alive for decades by equity withdrawal from ever-rising residential land values, handle the property slump, and won't they go under before the election?
Well, small businesses, I think 80% of them fail within 2 years. So there's always businesses failing. It won't be as bad as it has been. It will be slightly better, but as you say, house price inflation, the ANZ has cut their forecast from this year from 5 to 2%, which is less than prices are going to rise in the shops. So the real value of people's houses will, let's say, stay the same, roughly. I mean, at that point, it's marginal. But yeah, the idea that you could call the bank and ask for another 50 grand or 100 grand because your house has gone up in value, that is gone and probably gone forever. And I think everyone across the political spectrum would say that's a good thing, that culture is over, that we seem now to have stable house prices. Between Chris Bishop wanting them to crash and Christopher Luxon wanting them to increase, maybe we've got the good mean here, and they're going to stay stable over the next few years.
John, Stats New Zealand's housing living costs, published yesterday, showed the poorest 20% of households, beneficiaries and pensioners, experienced higher inflation in the last year than the 3.1% inflation reported last month, and higher than the 0.8% experienced by the richest 20%, many of whom have benefited from lower mortgage costs. This economy is objectively helping the minority rich while punishing the majority poor. When does that message get through to voters?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I think New Zealanders don't appreciate that there's no lower class anymore. What you've got is a large ex-middle class that are really struggling and are at the behest of the 2% that control over 54% of our wealth.
Yeah.
And until their control on Parliament and their purchase of parties and politicians accordingly is arrested, the only thing that'll happen is that that middle class will become poorer and poorer. And then they'll start to, as they do, poor people, internalise their problems, start to attack one another rather than look upstairs where everything's happened.
Yes.
I did want to pick up a couple of points that Matthew had raised. One is that this government got all giddy over a 0.7% increase in GDP.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
I mean, for goodness sakes, if that's all they got to chortle about. Also agree, and we've all had this on the program before, that no one in their right mind would have provided those tax breaks. And the more egregious was the way in which they were calibrated. They were calibrated to the top end of town.
Yes.
So
the landlords, the $3 billion borrowed for their tax cuts.
Yeah. The other point made, which is a very important point, is governments in small democracies like ourselves, they provide wayfinders, for investors. And this government has never done that. So, for instance, it's put the handbrake on construction. So what you see is some of the fastest growth in small business construction, chippies, tradies. And that's why virtually every 7 minutes, one Kiwi leaves the country.
Yes.
So when you tank economies like construction, they have huge knock-on impacts in regard to, you name it, mechanics, petrol and out, apprentices. It knocks the whole economy. Now, you can't throw a switch and power that back up.
Right.
Now, so your question was about the green shoots. There's no doubt that our Reserve Bank will start looking like Australia to bump the OCR.
They have to, don't they?
Well, they're heading between rock and a hard place because of inflation.
Yes.
Now the problem is in the old days, OCR comes down, everyone mortgages up, and away you go again on the property tree.
Yeah.
That's no longer true.
No.
Yeah, so for the reasons that Mr. Hooton has indicated, the housing sort of property area is distressed, And the thing putting prices down is distressed sales.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
not
Yes.
not anything else.
Yes.
Yeah, and then the next problem is if the OCR is going up, you already got a very squeezed group of people in housing that have reset mortgages coming off.
So high.
Well, I
that's
just
right,
don't
that's
see.
right.
Well, I just don't see the green shoots coming on before the 7th of November.
Follow-up question. Doesn't it say something bad about the left right now that we can have such bad economic conditions and the government is still polling so well? Isn't that a reflection on us on the left?
Oh yeah, that's true at one level. In the poll of polls and the way it's working, if you discount courier taxpayers nonsense,
Yeah. We do on the Daily Blog. We don't include them in our poll of polls. We've cut them out.
No, you can't. They're so dodgy. And they always, in an election year, cook up the right. And,
Don't they just?
And they'll always get New Zealand first across the line with that. So, but we all understand how cooked that poll is. If you were to poll polls of others, that's cool. The final thing I'll say on polls is there is no mathematical or arithmetic in regard to a cohort of Māori that are polled in all of these polls that can give you a steer of what's going on in the Māori electorates.
Yeah.
You can't.
No.
No, this is a litmus test on what majority of Pākehās think about Te Pāti Māori.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Matthew Tukaki, data released this morning shows 12,000 more Kiwis went into debt in the final 2 months of 2025 as Christmas spending ramped up, according to figures from Centrix. That was greater than the previous 2 years when consumer arrears rose 9,000 in 2024 and 8,000 in 2023. How does the government tell those in debt that things are getting better economically?
So a couple of things. I mean, I remember pushing back against Cameron Bagley on this show a couple of shows ago. When I referred to the increase in credit card debt, personal credit card debt, and I said to Bagley, who comes across as some sort of pontificating Pope fest, that no, Cameron, I'm not talking about what's going on now. I'm talking about personal credit card debt coming down.
That's
the
right.
line.
That's right.
Because
And it's gone up.
Yeah, because the vast majority of people in the middle classes are robbing Peter to pay Paul from credit cards to keep their mortgages paid. And now what we're seeing also is always what I used to call externalities or peripheral costs such as rates, insurances, all of these things going up as well. So they're already on a thin knife edge in robbing Peter to pay Paul. They've got nothing left in the tank. That's why we've seen retail spending not relax but go down, if not taper off. I mean, and the other thing too in the retail sector, Bomber, let's be clear, people are not wanting to pay high prices in high street shops or boutiques anymore. That's why Smith & Co. went bust. They're going to team you because that's all at the moment they can afford. And so when you've got AA Insurance and others starting to pull back, it begs the question of how much more of those externalities or those other costs are going to creep up. So we already know that rates and insurance and these things, power costs are still, we had a question of the day on power. Are you seeing your power prices going up on the Wātea Facebook page? 95% said yes, 5% said they weren't sure because they weren't the ones paying the bill.
95%?
95%. So people are still seeing that wash through. They're getting a little bit of relief from time to time, not because wages are increases to keep pace with the increase in cost of living or food, but because they're just getting side hustles or trying to find new things or new ways of cutting costs themselves in the household. So there's that. Now, what this government has not done at all in the last 3 years is to invest in stimulus, or stimulus being invested into the economy. In fact, they're waiting for the market to somehow take over. Well, the market doesn't have access to the sort of capital or the rates that a government does. The government isn't investing anything in construction and innovation in any real industry around the place. And so that becomes very problematic, including, don't forget, I mean, inflation is still at the top of the band. So there is very little room, and John's right, very little room for the Reserve Bank to manoeuvre on this one. There's no question that this government would never entertain a cost freezes or anything like that, or even removing GST on food.
Here are a couple of headlines for you, Mr. Tukaki. BNZ and ANZ have halved their house price inflation forecast for 2026 to 2%. This is a point that Hooten was making. Landlord house selling intentions spiked amongst with mortgage rate hikes fears, and AA Insurance is pulling out of flood-prone Westport. These are all headlines that tell us that something is deeply broken in the New Zealand economy, aren't they?
Well, to be frank, and that's why I use that Latin word at the top of the thing. I mean, it's foolhardy, it's silly business going on. We are led to believe that the right are better at managing the economy than the left. To be frank, the people best able to manage their own economy at the moment is Māori, for the Māori economy.
Yeah,
that's right. If you want to see green shoots, go to the Māori economy.
Māori Queen.
Look at what Ngāi Tahu's doing. Look at where they're investing. Look at all the developments that are going on. That's been funded by iwi and hapu. Look at Ngāti Whātua, Ki Orake. Look at Ngāi Tahu. Look at Tainui. Look at all of these different hapu and iwi. And at the same time, they're taking more responsibility for social service delivery as well, at the same time as government continue to cut back. Sorry, I want to finish on the unemployment rate with this one as well, because that's really, really important. We're already seeing the mid-range of 5.5 to 5.4 to 5.5% for unemployment. Māori unemployment obviously much higher. But we haven't seen unemployment completely wash through, because what we don't deal with is underemployment.
Yes.
So as we don't see wage growth keep up with the cost of living, we see people trying to find other side jobs and other side hustles.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, it's not a full-time job people are working anymore. It's a full-time job plus part-time plus.
Yeah.
It's pretty dire out there. That's what the data is showing from the Wātea audience anyway.
Quick round on that point then. The unemployment rate is currently 5.3%. The unemployment number is out tomorrow. What will it be, Matthew Hooton?
I think, I'm not going to predict the rate, but I think we're going to see a very large increase in employment and people participating in the workforce. And so we probably will see the total number of jobs in the economy having risen substantially compared with the previous quarter. But yeah, the unemployment figure will probably stay around about the same as it is now.
John, where will unemployment be tomorrow?
Well, here's the thing. With this government, somebody waved the magic wand as soon as Simeon Brown was made Minister of Health, and all of a sudden our immunisations for our under fives in all our communities went through the roof. This is just not true. You know, if you have a look at some of the way in which numbers are coming out, I really struggle with numbers like that coming out when we know on the street that despite 15 years as our chief of Waitemata District Health Board, as it was then, Bramley arrives in Wellington as head of health, and within months has waved a wand, and all the IMs are going through the roof, right?
You think it's the numbers are being cooked?
Well, I don't. Here's my thing. I don't see. We have over 200 clinics that we get information out of. That's just not, and they're in the tough areas.
Yeah.
That's just, unless you have a final order approach. This government's destroyed that. Solely because they think it's the organised crime group for the
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
But when they've destroyed that, they haven't destroyed our brains.
Yeah.
And our understanding and knowledge of what's going on the street. So my problem is the way they count the unemployed.
Right.
Where they're rating underemployed, and how underemployed you have to be unemployed, and how much you have to be drawing on, and you get worked over at MSD.
Yes.
Because under this government, anyone that is looking for a job is a lazy prick, right?
Yes.
But when you've tanked the economy and there are no jobs, makes it very difficult for that. So that's all I'm saying.
Unemployment rate tomorrow, what do you think it's going to be?
Again, I'm not one to predict this one, but I'd say relatively around the same. But let me just make this point. 2 points actually. Number one, I think market participation is going to be hard to predict. Mainly because a lot of people have given up looking for work because there are no jobs out there. It's really hard psychologically when you've made 100 applications and get knocked back for 101. You know, or alternatively, let's not forget more than 70,000 New Zealanders have left the country in the last 12 months. A lot of those people are working age people. They're permanently lost as either job seekers or job searchers to the economy or participants. And when the government got rid of the Productivity Commission, we lost an avenue of really having a look at some of the things that are going on in terms of productivity within the economy. So, to be frank, I also don't trust numbers that come from Statistics New Zealand any longer, mainly because, and I'm not going to call it fudging the books or cooking the books as you might do, but I'd say that we have a situation with the government department that can no longer be trusted. The fact is, I've stuffed up on multiple sensors. They stuff up on data all the time. And when you've got a government who has lost control of their finances with no strategy whatsoever other than to cut, slash and burn all the wrong places and give money out like drunken sailors to their mates at the yacht club, then, sorry, but I cannot see unemployment moving in the down direction.
Comrades, we need to move on to...
I've got to make a brief intervention on this.
Please, intervene.
Look, I
Come
do
on,
not,
you loved it.
I do not very often say nice things about the Wellington bureaucracy.
You
I think it
hate
should
the
be cut
Wellington
in half.
bureaucracy.
But could I just say the people at Statistics New Zealand are the best of the best in that bureaucracy. They are completely neutral. They are complete nerds. They do their very, very best. The numbers from time to time will be wrong. There are ways you can challenge their methodology. But I think, President Trump has attacked the American Stats Department. If you undermine public acceptance that the Stats Department is at the least doing an honest job, the best job it can, then you cease to be able to have a reasonable political debate in New Zealand. And I think we need to be very careful. Yes, inflation will never be exactly what it says. Unemployment will never be exactly what it says. They're all slightly wrong. Don't get me wrong. That's the nature of stats.
Particularly
but let's
Treasury.
not get into Donald Trump style.
Sure.
Okay.
Hang on.
Have a crack at Treasury if you want.
Hang on. Let me go first on this. I'm talking about a government agency who has failed on multiple censuses to collect data that's fairly distributable and honest and up to date. I think 2 censuses in a row. We've lost a chief government statistician not once but twice. I think the last one was Liz McPherson, who then went over to one of the other jobs over at the Privacy Commission. I mean, no, it is about trust in our institutions. I think Matthew Hooton is right, but I don't trust him. I'm sorry.
Yeah, look, I don't lay the blame solely at the feet of statistics. I do lay the blame at dodgy MSD numbers, right? And what is put across there. I do watch the way the Ministry of Education looks at attendance records filed by schools and how they're supposedly own up, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's going to be, it's the source information that's been fed on whatever the spreadsheet or the data set is to statistics, right? So it's one thing.
It's a different point, and it's more reasonable to make that point. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I just did.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Yeah,
but let's just isolate the stats. It's like the rugby referee. Stats New Zealand is right even when it's wrong.
Comrades,
and everyone else is a bit dodgy.
Comrades, we need to move on to issue 2 tonight, and that is the rise of anti-immigrant sentiment alongside the rise of New Zealand First in the polls. John, Shane Jones has attacked bucket people. Bishop Brian Tamaki is attempting street fights with migrants, and Winston attacks the free trade deal with India. New Zealand First has never lost votes for bashing Māori, bashing the treaty, and bashing immigrants. Will this get New Zealand First to 15%?
Oh, I don't know about 15%, but the playbook is outstanding. At the moment, the licensing of burning bridges to communities, of slicing and dicing people and vilifying, demonising them,
right,
is the playbook. Now, I feel really sorry for the Indian community in this country. Most of them are hardworking.
Yes.
Right, and do extraordinarily well.
Yes.
Them do wrong. It's a bit like when the Māoris do wrong, right? Those dirty, rotten whores. Or next minute, somebody pulls a shady and it's an Indian.
Yep.
They're all over the front page.
Yep.
And next minute, every Indian's a crook.
Right.
So, and that's the nasty side of racism in this country.
Yeah.
You're perceived to be fair and balanced, etc. Well, 85% of all pedophiles in prison right now happen to be white.
Yeah. We don't talk about that.
Yeah. Well,
don't really talk.
One of them's the ACT president. But see, here's the thing. But here's the thing. The thing.
Former act president.
The thing is that well, not if David Seymour could help it. But here's the thing. But here's the thing, which is quite important in this debate. We have to continue to turn the discussion back that you should be judged on the strength of your character, not on your colour, not on your reo, not on your faith. Yeah. So but it just goes to show you that there's this ugly underbelly that's been awoken in Aotearoa and been licensed to go out and do this.
Follow-up question, is this resentment against migrant workers the cultural backlash to mass immigration?
Well, there's a couple of issues there that we have to unpack. One of them is in a tough economic area and in a tough employment place where underemployment is not counted properly, and people are on the breadline and then struggling to get jobs, but running from one or two part-time jobs. That number has to be counted. Now, that builds tension.
Yep.
And when you build tension, you tend to look at, those dirty, rotten immigrants got my job. Well, that it doesn't play out as simply as that. It just doesn't work like that. Here's the other thing. We bring slave labour in from the islands.
Right.
And they work our farms.
Yes.
And that takes away a lot of contract work that contract groups used to be able to deploy.
That's right.
Pacific Island people from here as well as others, right? So there's a lot of things that have been licensed that actually gouge out the bottom end of employment entry, where people actually get runs on the board, build a bit of a curriculum vitae, even though it's manual work.
Yes.
Yeah. All of these avenues have been destroyed by this sort of neoliberal bullshit that happens. So the easy part to do is blame my poor life, the fact that I can't pay a mortgage, the fact that my sex life's turned to bloody custard, whatever it is, you can blame it on the immigrants.
Right. Mr. Tukaki, these domestic workers' fears of being undercut by migrant workers is legitimate when you consider how many migrant workers are exploited in New Zealand. We only have, I was pointing out to Chippy, one labour inspectorate for every 3,000 migrant workers. Is employing more labour inspectorates the first step to calming those economic anxieties that we're playing to?
2 points, Bomber. Number one is things are pretty bad when you've got to introduce a slavery bill, and one of the coalition partners refuses to back it. So that's the first problem. The second thing is we have whakapapa in this area in the way that we treat migrants and people that settle in this country.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about European settlement. I'm talking about what happened to the Chinese when they first came here,
Right.
and
Poll
mined
tax.
gold and,
Yep.
and poll tax and things like that. I'm talking about the way that we treated the islanders in the
Yes.
1970s and the Dawn raids,
Yes.
and all that nefarious.
We're happy to
business.
exploit the labour, but the moment they want to be New Zealanders, then we suddenly have a
absolutely.
problem.
And I remind people, similar to the Afghans in Australia, the camel traders in the outback, people from other countries, from diverse backgrounds, mostly people of colour, have come here and have been treated like crap. I mean, even during World War II, we interned Japanese people, mainly citizens of this country and residents of this country, because we were afraid of the big yellow terror.
Yeah.
Now, whether that was justified or not, we have whakapapa in this area, and it's about time it stopped.
Yeah.
It is a pathetic, gross injustice that we treat people from different backgrounds just because they're brown like crap. And you see it in what's going on in Whangaparai at the moment. I mean, geez, the Shane Jones was really quick to step in when there was even a hint of those naughty Asians coming in and pilfering the seabed because somebody said, I saw him down there. No, it was probably a rock fisherman, and you can cut that out. But the other thing too, from a Māori perspective, and John hopefully can back me up on this, a lot of our own whakapapa is intertwined with other ethnic groups,
Right.
Not just Irish and not just European.
Yeah, totally.
People from Indian
Totally,
backgrounds and
totally.
all this other sort of stuff. And Māori ourselves, we're not a homogenous group of a single hapu or a single iwi. We're all different. But, this is the playbook that New Zealand First is going to play. And sadly, some people will listen to it mainly from a European ilk and background, but that's more also fear that they appear to think still that they are losing their own identity.
Follow-up question. Shane Jones, as you pointed out, has stepped into the rock pool bucket people culture fight, which is ironic Because if we're talking about stripping the ocean clean, his support of the fishing industry does far more environmental damage than bucket people do, don't they?
Well, that's right. I mean, no one's having a talk about what's going on the Chatham Rise with the orange roughy, for example,
Right.
and our stocks there. No one's talking about what's going on in the pilfering of our economic zone from encroachment of foreign fisheries, all that sort of stuff. But when you say those naughty foreigners, those dirty immigrants over there in the corner are coming to raid our seabed and take the kinners and the cockles and God knows what, straight in like Flynn. You know,
Yeah.
it's a terrible, terrible situation.
Matthew Hooton, the foreign minister, has attacked the WHO on Twitter and called for New Zealand to follow Trump and pull out. Does this show how unhinged with power New Zealand First feels going into election year?
I think that is legitimate for a political party to be sceptical of UN agencies which are profoundly corrupt. And, you know, that is a political position which is a legitimate one.
From the
to
foreign
hold,
minister?
And he holds it as leader of the New Zealand First Party. So there we have that. And he says that when he speaks as foreign minister on behalf of the New Zealand government, he has a different view. In a way, you could say that's not that different from Nicola Willis, who, as the deputy leader of the National Party, believes that the age of eligibility for superannuation should be increased. But speaking as finance minister on behalf of the coalition government, she says it will stay at 65. So in a way, I think, again, far be it for me to say anything nice about the Prime Minister or the Foreign Minister, but I think there is an issue of maturity of MMP. It's a three-way coalition. Politically, it's been successful in the sense that the two small parties have thrived. So it's been good. It hasn't been so good for the big party, but the coalition's on track to be re-elected just. All three parties are going to get back. And I think that it is legitimate in that type of governing arrangement for ministers to say, well, my party believes this, but in my portfolio, this is what the government believes. And of course, New Zealand First is against the World Health Organization. That's part of its story. It's always been against that sort of thing. It's a nationalist, conservative party.
Follow-up question, is Chris Luxon too weak to stop Winston from cannibalising National Party vote this election?
Yes.
Quick round. What percentage will New Zealand First have on election day? Mr. Tukaki?
14%.
John? What
sorry.
percentage will New Zealand First have on election day?
Oh, I think around. Well, it depends. If National comes in at 30, 32,
Yep.
they'll be high single digits.
Yep.
And close to 10.
Wow. Mr. Hooton, where will New Zealand First end on election day?
Okay, complex. I look at Australia. The Liberal and National parties combined are at 20%,
Yes.
and the One Nation Party is at 25%.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, that can't be ruled out, just as we're also seeing in the United Kingdom the collapse of Labour
Yes.
and the Conservatives. However, in a funny way, because we've had the New Zealand First Party for 30 years, which has run those sorts of themes, it's absorbed some of that anger that you see in Australia or in the UK. And I'd guess 15. I don't think they'll get up to the 25s that Pauline Hanson and Nigel Farage have in those other two English-speaking
15 still bloody
You know,
high.
Bob, sorry, Bob,
Yep,
just quickly.
jump in.
This is the One Nation playbook in play here.
Right.
I mean, we've seen Barnaby Joyce already cross over from the Nationals to One Nation. He'll probably drag in maybe 2 to 3% of the traditional National vote. You've probably got people who are voting Bob Katter in North Queensland. They'll probably transition over. And if Corey Bernardi, the former South Australian senator who was Liberal, ends up with One Nation, then you'll see that Winston's doing the same sort of thing. 1% here, 2%
Yes,
there, 3%
yes.
there. That's why Casey Costello's in there.
Yes.
That's why all these other, he's already fishing around probably for the next 1%, the next 2%.
Flat
the next
earthers,
3%.
people who
Absolutely.
believe the earth is
There
flat.
is a real issue here, and it's all around the world, and it is that the elites lost touch
Yeah.
with people, and the effect is Trump.
Yes.
And that's people being told by the Democrats, by Hillary Clinton, that it's good that they lost their jobs making cars because of globalization. And it is in a global sense.
But not for those who lost their jobs.
Not in those particular states. That's right. And so I think that what happened was the very success of globalization, the very success of free market capitalism in creating global wealth, transferring jobs from rich countries to poor countries quite often, the elite just started saying, oh, isn't that terrific? Isn't the world going well?
Yeah.
And they've lost support from their own voters, and it's disastrous because, free market capitalism and globalization are good policies overall.
Comrades, we need to move on to issue 3 tonight, and that is Trump's New World Disorder. Matthew Tukaki, over January we saw a cavalcade of crazy ideas Trump is pushing. Is the world safer for any of it, and will he strike Iran?
Yes to the latter. I think he's got no option now. He's already deployed the both elements of the Pacific and the Atlantic Fleet into the area, and given the fact that his allies have said you can't launch from here and they've cleaned out, I'd say that's a very good thing. Look, Matthew's right. Trump exists purely because the Democrats and the elites lost touch with everyday voters. The fact that the Democrats lost big swathes of votes in places like Illinois and the Midwest is incredibly telling. And the same is happening to the National Party in New Zealand. I mean, Christopher Luxon is so out of touch, it's not funny. And yet what you've got is you've got Te Pāti Māori and you've got the Greens and those peripheral parties becoming in touch more with middle New Zealand, and much more so than others. Thank God Brian Tamaki and his loony lot aren't quite there and will never be there. So, yeah, I mean, look, Trump is a factor.
Matthew Hooton, you have argued in a recent column that Trump represents the end of the rules-based order and that we desperately need to pivot away from China and America. What does a true independent foreign policy look like for New Zealand?
Well, there's no such thing as an independent foreign policy unless you're a great power. Donald Trump is running an independent foreign policy. You'd say that Putin is running an independent foreign policy, and so is China. But small countries, it's just an absurd idea. Foreign policy is about interdependence, and the United States in 1945 was the first great power that didn't act as a great power and set up a rules-based system. It's now unraveling it fast. And we need to be close to Australia as our only military ally and closest friend. We need to be closer to the Pacific Islands. We need to pay whatever it costs in aid and an investment to keep the Chinese out of the Pacific. And we need to form closer relations with ASEAN. And ironically, that is in some ways what the government's foreign policy, as expressed at least by the Prime Minister, has been.
John,
it's sometimes expressed differently by others.
The Māori Party are the only political party talking about neutrality as a foreign policy. With Trump becoming more irrational and China more encroaching, why should we consider neutrality?
Look, it's no secret that you do not have to align. Anyone that sells your sovereignty by aligning that, for some unknown reason, a little guy that's yellow with slit eyes is a bad person, but a big fat guy in the president's house is a good person, and solely on that basis can go jump in the lake. The sovereignty that we have in this country is not for sale, either to greenbacks or to Wans. So what we've got to do then, once you work out that, it's and this conversation is happening in the Pacific nations as we speak.
Yep.
Right? So we meet with them and have been a catalyst in this conversation about a demilitarized Pacific.
Yep.
Okay, Oceania.
Yep.
And then it's buttressed solely by Aotearoa having neutrality, but like the Switzerland of the South Pacific, for the want of some form of analogy. There's nothing wrong with it. We cannot afford, apart from what they call as interoperability, we cannot afford militarization to the extent that's been demanded by others. It's just not.
Right.
It's not a doable thing, right? The best we can do in terms of our navy at the moment is laying on the bed of the ocean off Samoa.
I know.
Like for goodness sakes,
25% of our navy's down there.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, let's get a reality check. And you get all these guys like Hooten over here rattling the saber. Let me go to war. I mean, really? I just think we have to think differently, and I just think we're friends to everybody already.
Enemy to none.
And enemy to none.
John's right. You can build more Anzac class frigates as much as you want. You can buy more planes for the Air Force as much as you want. The truth of the matter is we do not have the personnel to man the assets that we're attempting to buy anyway. I mean, these planes, the new Boeing 737 Poseidon things, whatever they are, we didn't even have enough personnel to man them.
Right.
That's how ridiculous it is. So I think we're having the wrong discussion.
Quick round. How will Matua Shane Jones sell us down the river with Trump over the rare earth minerals negotiations? Hooten.
Well, I don't think he's selling us down the river with Trump. He's having a negotiation with another country that has an interest in that topic.
Is the Prime Minister aware of it? Because the Prime Minister doesn't seem to be aware of the negotiation.
No, the Prime Minister said he wasn't aware of that.
Well, how's that possible?
Well, it's an unusual situation.
It's a very unusual.
Because
John, how does he not know about it, that Shane Jones negotiated
Well,
with
he signed
America?
up to a coalition agreement where Matthew Hooten touched on it earlier in the show, where in effect the two junior parties walk into Parliament, and when their leaders walk into Parliament, they're the Prime Minister. Luxon plays a visiting role now and then when he's allowed to have a say. And that's why his vote's shrinking, and that's why those two are making so big a plays.
Mr. Tukaki, are we going to have this terrible situation where Shane Jones comes back from market with 3 magic beans?
It's Shane Jones. I'd say 4 magic beans.
All right, fair enough. 4
say
magic
4
beans.
magic beans.
That's the deal then. Comrades, we need to wrap the show.
Hang on, 4 magic beans, 1 orange ruffy and a carway.
We need to wrap the show with a final word. Matthew Hooten, your final word this week, please, sir.
Just on the immigration issue, this is a genuine issue, and we need to distinguish between two things. The first is people who are already here. And if someone is here and they're a New Zealand citizen or a New Zealand permanent resident, as far as I'm concerned, they are as much a New Zealander in terms of the New Zealand state as a direct descendant of Kupe or a boy that escaped from the Endeavour, right? But there is an issue, and Maori people must know the dangers of signing agreements with great powers about governance and allowing immigration to occur, and perhaps things working out in the following 200 years a bit differently from what was intended. And there is nothing wrong with New Zealand saying, look, as a debate, Business New Zealand, they think we should double the population to 10 million. There is nothing wrong with people saying, no, 5 million is about right. Let's make that one of the things that is distinct about it. And our birth rate is below replacement. So I think let's have a sensible debate about immigration in a way that perhaps iwi might have been benefited from doing so in 1839 and 1840.
Thank you. John, your final word this week, please, sir.
Oh, just on the immigration thing, I think there's just a lot of fluff around it. It actually melts down to one thing, that ugly racism that in the normal course of events before the pandemic, we could agree to disagree, and we could do it in a civil way. That's gone, right? Yeah. And so now it's consented to show really what side of the debate you're on, and into one another we go. And it's been set up, right?
Mr. Tukaki, your final word this week, please.
Our regional infrastructure is crumbling. The fact that we have roads, state highways that are impassable and communities cut off is an absolute indictment of the mismanagement of the national economy. Where we should be stimulating the economy by investing in infrastructure, this talk about other things is just silly. The fact that Hicks Bay is cut off, or Tairāwhiti, or the Waiaweka Gorge or whatever it might be. Up north, I mean, the north has been suffering. Te Awamutu has been suffering as a lack of investment for a long time.
Decades.
So my biggest last word of the evening is not about immigration. It's about the fact that we have shit infrastructure in this country, and woe betide anyone who wants to move here and not be able to get around the community. Nevertheless, of reminding people that New Zealand Post are recalcitrant fools in wanting to remove services from rural areas.
Thank you, comrades. And now to my final word. Brothers and sisters, I don't think bowing and grovelling to Trump in the manner this government has is a winning strategy any longer. The nation genocide and built on slavery, turning dictatorship seems very on brand for Trump. Fascism is what white people call capitalism when it treats them with the same contempt that colonization treats indigenous people. And right now, everyone is feeling colonized by Donald. Illegally kidnapping a president and then stealing all his oil. Shooting your own people for peacefully protesting. Trying to steal whole countries and setting up a ghoulish board of peace to property speculate in Gaza are the actions of a supervillain, not the President of the United States. Appealing to his vanity is not a foreign policy any longer. Don't you dare celebrate Anzac Day this year if you are going along with this orange fascist. Our forefathers fought against repression like Trump. They didn't fight for it. In solidarity, the revolution continues. Ka pai Aotearoa.
The Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. The Bradbury Group is an independent podcast through the Rover Network, sponsored by Wātea News. Everything on the show is an opinion and shouldn't be taken seriously enough to attempt defamation action against us. We were joking. We're never serious about anything. And officially, a small wetter in Avondale is legally the owner. Good luck finding him. Don't forget to follow, like and comment.